Tijuana, and sometimes I say Tijuana. Sometimes I say Turista Libre, and sometimes I say Turista Libre. Mm-hmm. It's the gringo versus Spanish or Mexican side of me. So you start this business. Was it a business in the beginning?
It wasn't. No, it was actually a meetup more so for friends. On the top of my list, moving out west after leaving Ohio was one. I'm like, I live 10 minutes from the beach. That's amazing. You know, I grew up in a place where getting to the beach was like an 18-hour drive. And we would go every summer, but I would always like cry on the way home because I was missing the ocean, you know?
Sure.
So the beach was always the top of the list. And then number two was like, I live 10 minutes away from Mexico, you know, like this is a place and a country and a culture and a language that I already love and have a, familiarity with, but from a textbook, from a middle school and a high school textbook point of view. So it was only a matter of time, I think, until I started to cross the border by myself. It was very difficult to find people that would go with me at first, but slowly and surely that started happening. And I soon realized that this is not all the things that it's not what people say. You know, it can be. I think it just, as we all know, and you've probably talked about this on other episodes of your podcast, that, you know, if you're coming to do things that you shouldn't be doing or looking for things that you shouldn't be doing, you're going to find them.
All bets are off.
Yeah, all bets are off. I mean, like 2 weeks ago, the news, the guy who plowed through the borderline, and ran over like 3 people.
Yeah, and I went through the border there on Sunday, the day before that.
The day before that. Yeah, I was actually on a tour. I was doing a private tour that day when that happened, and I had no idea it all went down. It wasn't until like later the next morning, I think, that I saw. But anyway, like it's a place where, of course, people have ideas about. And so I wanted to have my own chance to have my own ideas about the place. And the more I got to see it and the more I got to know it, I'm like, this is not what people are telling me. It's very much, it's complicated. It's, but it's not what everyone is making it out to be, at least for me. And so I eventually wound up making a group of friends there, and then I was dating someone there, and then spending 4 nights a week there, and but still maintaining my home in San Diego. I was in North Park at the time and working in Mission Valley. And so when my lease was up, my ex, I asked him if I could move in, basically because I was already there 4 nights a week. And so that's how it all started. I was living finally this, binational dream, of 2 countries in 1 day. And even doing that, for a good 6 months, it was still very difficult to convince friends to come across the border with me. And not to do crazy stuff, not to do like what you would imagine, right? No papas and beers, no zona rosa.
Hey, nothing against papas and beer here.
I know they're friends of the family, but the stigma, right? Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah, the stigma that comes with that idea that that's all there is and that's all there will happen if you do cross the border. So just to go to the art museum, or to go to a movie, or to go to have dinner, nothing crazy. It was really difficult to get people to come across the border. And I think it's because it was like a combination of just like the pain that it is to get down to the border and to cross and whatnot, which is crazy because for me that was like
part of the process. And it was part of the thing to enjoy.
The journey is the destination,
exactly,
right? Yeah, walking across that border is like such a really cool thing to do, I think. And then also like the fear that's involved. So I just basically started doing very loosely organized monthly outings for friends. It was by word of mouth, and people loved it. Back in those days, people were still on MySpace. So it's like, I think an important thing is to talk about technology 10 years ago and how much it has changed, People were still on MySpace. People were just barely opening their Facebook accounts. Google Maps just was like a gray line south of the border. It was just a gray blob. Yep. So like a line and no street directions, no whatnot. Uber was still, almost a decade away from happening. And so the city was very difficult to get around and to know unless you have some sort of understanding of the language and basically an understanding of the culture and how things work, right? Because I think any American who, whether you speak Spanish or whether you don't speak Spanish, but any non-Latino American or maybe even Latino Americans who go across the border have been overcharged in a cab, for example. We all know, like the cabs, for example, before Uber, there's no meters in them, so you have to agree on a price before you get in the cab. You don't know where you're going. You don't know how much it costs. The cab drivers know that you don't know this. So it all comes into play, right? So that's just a very, very small,
exactly, yeah,
situation that we're dealing with when we're crossing the border here. So it was like a monthly meetup for friends, and they loved it. So the themes would change every month. And about 2 years into doing that, I was laid off at the paper. A lot of us lost jobs. It's very difficult to make ends meet writing these days, or doing anything that doesn't involve,
It's just difficult.
Yeah.
It's difficult
Exactly.
to be an adult. Let's just put it that way.
It is very difficult, yeah. And they told us this in college. Like, if you guys are like, this was like, I was the last class before they merged the journalism and the communications programs.
Yeah.
Which that's even like a big ethical thing, So anyway, this would already had a following. It was very grassroots, and I'm like, okay, if I give it some time and some TLC, and started to market it more like a business, and that's what led to what it is today.
So where did the school bus start?
The school
because
bus,
that's part of your logo, and
Yeah.
you were sharing with me that there may be a time in the near future where the school bus gets retired, but it will forever be part of Turista Libre's soul because it's part of the logo, right?
Yeah, well, like we said a couple minutes ago, the journey is the destination, So one of the aspects of the type of tours that we do in Tijuana, at least, we use public transportation. And that's how it started. Before it was a business, it was just a meetup for friends. I was actually getting people on and off public buses and public cabs and whatnot. That was part of the experience for them to know how that whole system works, because it's so confusing, like based on the color of the vehicle and like the very, very fine print that's on the back fender. That's how you know what part of the city it services. And then also just like the stigma of being on a public bus south of the border. A lot of people have never done that before. So that was part of the learning curve, and to make people feel less afraid of being in a situation like that. Like, don't feel uncomfortable. This is how you do it, right? This is how it works, and this is how it gets you to where you're going. So when the group started to get bigger than like 5 to 10, at first they were, on average 5 to 10 people, but when I got to be like 15 or 20 and the trips were more regular, it's like, okay, we need our own bus. So that's when we went and found an actual bus driver, and we've been working with the same bus driver now for 8 years. Yeah. But
wait, so the bus driver he owns the bus, and you just
it's
clarify this a little. Maybe it's a little gray.
It is gray. It is, so the public bus system in Tijuana works more like a cab system in the north, on the north side of the border. So the units are privately owned and maintained, but they're regulated by the city, and there's also a bus company that's a part there. So it's very complicated. We could spend the rest of our time kind of talking about all this red tape. But essentially, our bus is an old U.S. school bus that these days operates as a public transit bus in Tijuana. In the past 3 years, the city has been moving away from the old international school bus model to Mercedes Sprinters, and that's the slow shift in public transit south of the border, which is great because they're better for the environment. They're probably safer as well, and they spend less gas, less pollution going into the air. So we're slowly having to finally move away from
the school bus.
From the school bus, but it will always be a part of the...
don't ever change your logo.
Yeah, I love the logo. Yeah, I love it, and it's like our T-shirts have the bus front in the middle, and then it says on the top it says "Hay turistas," there are tourists, and then at the bottom "hay Turista Libre," and there's Turista Libre. So it's all about saying that you, as a visitor to a place that is not yours, that you don't come from, but you really do have the heart and soul and the good intention to know,
the desire
to know a place for what it really is, not to come and just basically consume, but to really know how people live and to learn more about it.
So let's throw a disclaimer out there right now. Turista Libre is not a tour company that is going to take you to while you may visit a bar, and I'm assuming you maybe take people to bars, but it is an opportunity for foreigners to be immersed in local culture. Is that a good way to put that?
Definitely. And it's all, I think, rooted in this white kid from Cincinnati, Ohio, being in the middle of the mountains in Japan and not feeling like he was, sticking out I totally was sticking out, But the fact was that I was made to feel very comfortable and welcomed, and I was also putting my part by wanting to understand and wanting to learn more about life there, and to get right down to the best example, the public bath culture in Japan. That was a big eye opener for me. To be my first dose of public nudity was in a public bathhouse in Japan, where women are in one bath and the men on the other, but it's like everyone from like, 2-year-olds to like 80-year-olds. And I'm the only white 16-year-old. I'm the only white guy in the whole place, right? And this is the first time I've ever been naked in public. So just like for that is for me was such it could have been terrifying. I could have had nightmares after it. I
Sure.
could have, but no, it was actually very liberating to like, I'm being treated just like everyone else right now. So that might come off as a really random comparison to how we try to package
but I think I can draw the conclusion there. As a guy, and I shared this with you earlier, as a guy who lived in southern Baja for a decade, I used to tell people, it was a very healthy experience to be a white American male living in a place where I was a minority. And were there times where that was frustrating? Yeah, absolutely. But looking back on it, and even while I was experiencing it, I had the foresight and the intellect, or maybe just the luck of being able to analyze it and realize that, man, this is what a lot of other people feel like in other places around the world, and even in my home country. And so it just opened my eyes to the fact that this stuff does exist.
Mm-hmm.
And
people aren't making it up.
I won't say that I went on some sort of a crusade to break down those barriers, but just being aware of it, I think makes you more of a well-rounded human being. Let's just put it that way.
Yeah.
And I also think that having traveled the world, fortunately, I mean, I've been to Africa, I've been to Europe, I've been to Central and South America. I haven't been to Australia. I think they're a lot like us here in the United States, but I mean, at the end of the day, what makes us tick as human beings, it's all the same thing, and borders, language barriers, cultural differences. I mean, those things are all peripheral things that when you peel the layers back and you really embed yourself in a different culture, the similarities, while I'm going to say are surprising, they shouldn't be, because the what makes us human beings is, I think there's a very common thread that's woven through all of us.
Definitely. And what you're saying is really reminding me of one of the more, there are often very touching moments on tours where I am, into a day with spending 5 hours with complete strangers, and then like all of a sudden like hugs and tears are happening.
Right.
And it's because of things like this. It was a flea market tour. We do a monthly market hop, and it takes you to 4 different markets around the city, and they're all very different from like your typical like artisan market where like the typical tourist would go ever since the 70s, to the 180, like to the oldest flea market in the whole city. And on this trip, I would say a large portion of the people who come on our tours are from Southern California, whether it's San Diego, Los Angeles, but also we're more and more these days getting people from all over the place, because visitors to San Diego want to come across the border, but they don't really know how to do it, and so they start to Google around, they find us. So we get a lot of people from all over the place. And it was one couple, it was a husband and wife, they were from a small town in Kentucky, I forget which part, I think it was near Louisville. But she was a school teacher. And at the end of the day, after she'd gone to these 4 markets and we're waiting for the bus to come pick us up at the bus stop, because it's a bus, right? So the bus picks us up at the bus stop.
Of course.
She's just standing on a very, very, very busy street in downtown Tijuana and is taking it all in. It shows. And she just says, like, these days in the United States and in my school where I work, we're being told how different we are and how important our differences are, and how, you were this and you were that and this and this and that. And she says, and I get that, but it also like makes it so easy for us to forget the similarities that we have.
Yeah.
And she said, what I learned today is, and this was her first time, not just in Tijuana, but her first time in Mexico. And she's on a flea market tour with us, which is wonderful. I'm so happy when those situations happen. She starts tearing up, and she's saying, like, it's really touching to know, like, just being here for a few hours and in a situation like this, that I'm able to remember that we have more in common than we think.
Yeah.
And that we're allowed to believe sometimes, too. So it's really, really cool when things like that happen and people are touching, like, emotions.
Yeah.
That's why it's more than a tour, I promise. Like I said earlier, tour is a 4-letter word.
Okay, so I'm going to address this right now. I told you before we started this that I've been trying to confine these to 30 minutes, but we are bumping up on the 30-minute mark, and we're 100% going to go into the 1 hour mark right now.
I'm happy with that.
Yeah, me too, because I feel like there's a lot more that